Good morning. I'm Pete Najarian. This is the take on this Tuesday morning for Market Rebellion. If you want movement, you want volatility, you want velocity, well, this is the place to be. It's absolutely been crazy. We had a crazy week last week. We started off this week. Now, a little bit crazy. Some pressure on the Dow early, down about 100 points. Next thing you know, very quickly, it's down 300 points with a modest recovery during the day, during the middle part of the day. And then in the last 15 minutes or so, gave up and actually finished down about at the lows of the session, 320 points to the downside for the Dow. And look over at the NASDAQ, very, very similar in terms of the pattern that was going on there. First 3 hours or so, it got a little bit better. Final 30 minutes, the sell-off began about 90 points coming out of the NASDAQ. It actually finished down the day, down 217 points. So, of course, there's some volatility. As a matter of fact, I look over at the volatility index and I see a 19 to 21 actually closed a lot closer to that 21 level, about 20-30. So back above 20 for that volatility index in terms of where it closed. Now, the 10-year, 141, that was getting beat up a little bit. That was something that stood out. Also, you look over at crude, still kind of hanging in there, but a little bit above 71. Actually finished the day around 71.20. Not very volatile, but certainly just a little bit coming out of crude over the last couple of sessions. There's no doubt about that. Now, you take a look over at energy and what was some of the acceleration of that little bit of a push getting closer to 71. A lot of people seem to get their hands out there, started selling a lot in the energy space. It was down 2% early, closed almost 3% to the downside. Consumer discretion actually did accelerate to the downside as well. That was about 2% to the downside. Final few hours actually finished down 2.5%. Financials finished down about 1%. You get the idea. Just a steady kind of a day in the mid part, and then that selling just seemed to really be very, very powerful. Volumes were surprisingly very low, 38.7 million. Again, that's really not that low, but that's against the averages of late. That's significantly off of where we've been. Apple traded 3.2 million contracts. By the way, 70% of those contracts trading in Apple were on the call side. Then you look over at the next couple that actually were in that million category. You got Ford, which has been very strong of late. Obviously, everybody's been talking about that name. And the volume has been there. 1.2 million contracts there, a million contracts in Tesla. A lot different in terms of what the options look like in those two names, however. A lot more of that mix, closer to about a 50-50 mix of calls and puts. So just to give you a little bit of a highlight on that, it's kind of interesting to see where some of the option activity, and we talked about a lot of that option activity yesterday, especially when you talk about Apple. That got all the way up to 182, a little bit above $182 a share yesterday. Actually closed around 175. Gives you a little bit of an idea when I talk about that late sell-off. There was a sell-off that started, and then that last 15 minutes or so really did accelerate for the Dow. So where were some strengths? Because you got to look at what are some of the weaknesses, but what are some of the strengths? Moderna had a really nice day, up about 6%. There's a little bit of a theme here because it's Moderna, it's Bristol Myers, it's also Pfizer. All of those names having a pretty decent session. And then you look over at Peloton, which had been beaten. You got to give it credit when it bounces. Had a really nice bounce yesterday, up nearly 7%. Facebook was actually positive. That was up a little over 1.5% or so. That stood out. Also, a lot of the very, very conservative areas, or however you want to categorize that. But Coca-Cola had a really nice day. Walmart had a very nice day as well. What wasn't going so well, we talked about sort of that energy sort of push. Those beta names in energy absolutely were getting hammered yesterday. You look at the XOP, a lot of the names that are in that particular ETF getting hammered. Names like APA and Marathon and Oxy and Halliburton. You go through that long list, all of those down 5% or more on the day. So certainly getting hammered. I think a lot of people are very nervous about what's been going on with Elon Musk and some of his selling as well, including today. And we are looking at that stock that was down yesterday about 5%. Semiconductors across the board were getting absolutely slammed, but NVIDIA stood out. That was down almost 7% yesterday, and GM gave back a lot of those gains that it had as well. Hotels, casinos, you name it, everything seemed to be getting at least some selling pressure throughout the day yesterday. So that kind of gives you a little bit of a backdrop into what we are seeing today, which is a really volatile session. It's been very interesting. Matter of fact, the volatility index actually above, or did get above 22. It's been trading somewhere near that 22 level since we started trading. Crude now below 71, got very close to 70, almost breaking through that 70, but still trading around 70, 20 or so in crude. But that, once again, getting hit to the downside. What's not getting hit is that 10-year, 145. That's a nice little bit of an elevation. Of course, what does that mean? It means the financials are participating. And when I look over at the Dow and I see the Dow just making all kinds of moves up and down and all around, it's been absolutely all over the place. A lot of what's been pulling the Dow back up has been those financials. You look at names like Travelers and Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan. Those are some of the names that are definitely leading the Dow back, because the Dow has been up as much as 100 and plus. It's been down over 100 points. Last I looked, it actually was flat, but then it very quickly moved up about 40 or 50 points. I think we're going to see a lot of that kind of movement today as people are sort of getting nervous. Also, the Fed and the Fed policy. So that's something that's on everybody's mind. You look at the NASDAQ, it's been getting hit for basically the start of the day. It was down about 1% in the pre-market. It's been down somewhere close to that for most of the session. We'll see. It's only the first hour of the session. We'll see what kind of movement we get out of that. But as I mentioned, the financials having a nice little turnaround too. Started off about 0.75% to the upside. It actually now closer to 1.25% move to the upside. So that on a nice little lift there. Technology had been getting hit. It was down about 0.7%, then it was down about 1%, then it was down about 1.5%. Technology definitely leading today when we're looking over at the NASDAQ and what's going on there. So a couple of things that are working in the positive area. Nucor looks pretty good. I look over at Walgreens, also looking pretty decent today, but there's a lot of weakness when you look across, and we mentioned some of the technology and so forth. You look at Adobe, you look at some of these names that are under pressure, they're definitely continuing to see a little bit of that selling pressure, especially some of these high multiple names. As a matter of fact, Peloton going into that world, down about 3% after that nice game that they had yesterday. The Chinese names getting hit as well. Then I look over at Salesforce and I look at Microsoft. Microsoft down close to 3% today, so that's something that's definitely pulling on the Dow and the NASDAQ as well. A lot going on, a lot of different moving parts. You got to be very, very careful. And obviously, when you're seeing the volatility index trading closer to 22, you know that folks are showing a little bit more fear probably than they have. And obviously, with the kind of movement, very, very justified where the volatility index is. I got two unusuals and I got the halftime report. So hopefully you'll get a chance to see us noon Eastern in the halftime trying to break all this down as well. So start with number one, AMC. Now, this is a name we haven't talked about in a really long time. Actually heard a little bit of a conversation about the meme stocks, or as we like to call them, the rebel stocks. We've heard a little bit of a conversation about that today on some of the financial television. The stock was trading AMC right around 21. It started moving from 21 all the way up towards 24. And as that was happening, 9,600 of the December 25 calls were being purchased. Started off at about, just call it sort of close to 75 cents, all the way up to about $1.50. As that stock was moving, so were these options to the upside. That stood out. Number two, Skechers. This name does hit once in a while, and they've been very, very consistent when it's hit. It seems like there's been a reason behind it. So that's why I wanted to point this one out. Stock trading right around 43.50. We got a buyer, not huge, but 2,000 of the December 23rd expiring. You get a little bit more time out of this one, and it's the 44 calls. Those are going for, call it $1. Now, what makes this an interesting trade, probably a smart trade, is they're buying those, the 25s, or the 44s rather, they're selling the 47s. So putting on a spread here, just looking for a little bit of upside, not expecting an absolute blowout to the upside, but that way giving themselves a little bit less premium at risk on this trade going in there with the spread. So that one definitely stood out. Interesting to see. And then, like I say, in the past, Skechers, when it's hit, seems to be pretty accurate. So we'll see if it is this time as well. Folks, have a great day of trading. Hope to see you at the halftime report.